We all know the creepy stories told around a campfire, but there are some that stick with you forever. And tonight, I'm going to tell you two such stories, stories that I'll never forget, no matter how many years pass. The story, the window in the forest. The fire crackles, the night growing darker, and the old man, hunched over the flames, begins to slowly tell his story. His voice is deep, a little raspy, but calm, as if he himself is part of the night. You know, kids, I want to tell you a story that happened when I was still young. Maybe. The fire crackles, the night growing darker, and the old man, hunched over the flames, begins to slowly tell his story. His voice is deep, a little raspy, but calm, as if he himself is part of the night. You know, kids, I'm going to tell you a story. It happened when I was still young, maybe around 25, 30. We all know that the forest isn't just a place for resting, but it's also for something else. What that something is, nobody can say for sure, but I can tell you, I know it's a fear. That year, I went into the woods with a buddy of mine, a little older, an experienced camper. We were headed for an overnight stay by a lake, a place we'd been to plenty of times. The forest was familiar, but that evening, it felt different. I can't explain it, but the air, it felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. All the usual sounds of the forest seemed darker, even more menacing. By nightfall, after we'd set up camp and lit the fire, I noticed something unusual. At first, I thought it was just a branch in the distance, but then I realized, no, it wasn't a branch, it was a window. A regular window, like you'd see in old houses, with a wooden frame standing right in the middle of the woods with no building around it. I shivered, looked at my friend, but he didn't see it, but I saw it. This forest, the one we were in, didn't have any houses, no buildings, just trees, a lake, and a stream. And yet this window, it looked like it had been there for ages, like part of something old, long forgotten. Something was off, but I couldn't stop staring at it. In the dark, it seemed to glow, almost as if it was calling me. I walked toward it, though something inside me was screaming to stay put. My friend didn't want to follow, but I went along. Step by step, I got closer, the fire behind me fading, its light swallowed by the forest darkness. When I got to the window, I saw a woman. She was standing there, like she was part of the window itself, but her eyes, they were empty, lifeless. She didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt like her gaze pierced me, like she was looking straight through me. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet wouldn't move. She just stood there like she knew what I feared and was laughing at me. That's when I heard it, something heavy moving in the dark behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing, just thick mist. When I looked back at the window, the woman was gone. I ran back to the camp, trying not to look over my shoulder, but when I got back to the fire, everything was wrong. My friend was sitting there, but when he looked at me, it was like he didn't recognize me. He didn't know me. I tried to explain what I had seen, but he didn't hear me. He was different, cold, empty. When I looked at his face, it was like it wasn't him anymore. I never stayed in that forest again. We left the next morning, but my friend, he was never found. Since that night, I've never gone back there. I know that window. It takes anyone who tries to uncover its secret, and if you see it, don't go near it. It doesn't just show you something. It takes you, whether you want it or not. The old man falls silent again, gazing at the fire. A moment of stillness, and then he adds, his voice barely audible. And don't forget, the forest never forgets. Sometimes it can return what's long gone. The sound of a log snapping fills the night, leaving only the lingering echoes of the chilling story, a story that refuses to let go. The story, The Hollow Tree. The crackling of the fire is the only sound that cuts through the night as the old man leans forward, his weathered hands resting on his knees. His eyes glint in the firelight, a mixture of weariness and something darker, something buried deep within. Listen closely, kids. This story isn't like the ones you hear around campfires every summer. This one has stuck with me for decades. It's a story that refuses to fade. You'll see why in a minute. It was about 30 years ago, maybe more, back when I was just starting to go out into the woods by myself. I had always been a loner, liked the peace of the trees, the silence of the night. That's how I ended up in the northern woods one winter. The kind of woods that's so thick you can't see the sky through the branches, where the snow stays frozen underfoot and the air is sharp enough to bite at your skin. I'd set up camp by a small creek, a place I'd been to before. A clearing surrounded by towering pines. The smell of pine sap so strong, it makes your head spin. The kind of place that feels like it could be the last place on Earth, and nothing could bother you there. That night, the stars were out, the moon high in the sky, casting everything in a cold, eerie glow. Everything felt still, like the world was holding its breath. I remember the wind stopped that evening. You could hear a pin drop, and that's when I first noticed it. It wasn't far from my camp, just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I looked, I realized I was wrong. There, just barely visible in the shadows, was a massive tree. Now, I've seen a lot of trees in my life, but this one was different. It stood alone, its trunk hollow, like something had eaten away the core of it. You could see straight through the center like it was a cave, but not one you'd want to crawl into. Something about it pulled me in. Something in the air around it felt wrong, but the curiosity got the better of me, like it always does with men like me. So I grabbed my lantern, the one with the flickering flame, and made my way toward it. The closer I got, the colder it became, like the air around the tree was sucking warmth from my body, but I pushed on. When I finally stood right in front of it, I could feel my heart start to race. The tree's hollow was large enough to swallow a manhole. The inside was dark, but not like the darkness around the rest of the forest. It was thick, almost like it was alive, like something was waiting inside, watching me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into that abyss, but something stirred within. It was subtle at first, like a movement, too quick to see. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure, standing in the shadow of the tree, almost like it was emerging from the darkness itself. I froze, my heart pounding. The figure was tall, too tall and draped in something dark, like a cloak or a robe. Its face was hidden, but I could feel it staring at me. Not with eyes, but with something worse. With malice. Cold malice that gripped me like a vice. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't. It was like my legs were made of stone. And the figure started to step closer, slowly, its feet not even touching the ground. Every movement was unnatural, like it wasn't meant to be there. Then I heard a whisper so faint it was barely audible, a voice that sent a chill down my spine. It's not your time yet. I don't know what that meant, but I knew I had to get out of there. I turned to run, but when I looked back, the tree was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. The spot where it had stood was now just empty forest, the darkness swallowing it whole. I didn't sleep that night. I kept my lantern burning, afraid that whatever I had seen was still out there, watching. And it wasn't just that tree or that figure. Something else had shifted in that forest, something ancient, something older than time itself. The next morning I packed up and left. I never went back to that part of the woods again. But that wasn't the end of it. A few years later, I ran into an old friend who had been in the northern woods a few months after me. He had heard about some strange disappearances in that area. Campers and hikers who just vanished. No trace, no sign of a struggle, just gone. I don't know what happened to them, but I've got my suspicions. That tree, whatever it was, it's not just a tree, it's a portal or a trap or maybe something worse. But don't take my word for it. If you ever find yourself in those woods and you see a tree like that, you better keep moving. Don't stop, don't look, and don't go near it, because if you do, you might find yourself part of it. The old man's voice trails off, and he stares into the fire, his face cast in shadows. The crackling of the flames fills the silence, leaving a lingering sense of unease in the air. Sometimes, the forest takes more than just people. It takes pieces of your soul, too.